Hey, how are you doing? Horn of Africa. This is the name of region located in northeastern area of Africa, known as Somali Peninsula, that belongs to Somalia, facing Arabian Peninsula in the east, across Gulf of Aden. So, World Food Program has reported that there was serious drought in this area, so that so many people were facing serious starvation in this area. So the number of people who are suffering from serious starvation now in Africa was estimated 22 million people according to World Food Program. So according to some aid groups, Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia are facing serious drought problem for the first time in 40 years because of water scarcity for a long time. So because of abnormal climate change that made the rainfall amount reduce overwhelmingly and consecutively for 4 years, that caused massive livestock and plants mortality in Africa. So about 100 million people have no choice but to refuge from their hometown to get food and water to survive. So World Food Program appealed to the world that there is still no end in solution of drought problem in Africa, so that we have to save people's lives by securing necessary resources and prevent people from falling into a devastating starvation in Africa. And it also appealed the necessity of massive amount of funds that are about 418 million US dollars annually to save these people to the world. And at the beginning of this year, World Food Program appealed to the world that about 13 million people face a serious starvation crisis in Kenya and Somalia and Ethiopia, and asked the world to give great amount of donation to these countries through World Food Program. But there are so many difficulties in attracting people's attention for fundraising thanks to the influence of Ukraine invasion by Russia at that time. But starvation and drought has frequently attacked African countries and afflicted people living there for a long time. And as often as drought disaster happened in African countries, organizations related to United Nations devoted support with a large amount of donations to these countries. But the disaster repeats itself, ironically. So the countries that suffer from drought are not only African countries, as you know, but we have Australia and China and Ukraine and Russia and also America and other countries as well that suffer from drought. So of course the level of drought of each country is different from each other, but they uniquely have this same problem of natural disaster in each country, and they get over the situation domestically unless it is big enough to accept assistance from other countries. So, of course, we have to think about the difference of the state power in each country to tackle the problem of natural disaster. But although African countries can easily forecast drought that has afflicted people's living repeatedly for a long time in the history of these countries, it seems to me I can't feel their intention of disaster risk management for an unexpected drought on daily basis. Or I can't feel their intention to improve infrastructure to prepare for drought beforehand, because it is well known fact that drought is a unique natural disaster problem in African countries, So, but they entrust the problem of this kind of natural disaster to organizations related to the United Nations always. 80 or 90%. So they got donations from the aid organizations and also accepted assistance from other countries as well. And their disaster recovery is fully premised on assistance from aid organizations, external aid organizations, and other countries. And unless African countries change how they face these kind of problems, they can't even get over this kind of situation by themselves forever, I think. So they should understand that it is not necessarily that aid organizations and external aid organizations can always help these African countries as often as drought attacks African countries with unavoidable factors. So I know disaster's level of drought this time is comparable to national crisis for African countries this time, but they have to be African countries have to be more independent from full assistance from aid organizations someday. So as long as I saw the picture of the town of Kenya and Ethiopia and Somalia, these countries' economies seem to have developed in its own way to some extent, even though it is said that poverty is rampant around the society. It is note that there is no stable infrastructure that support these countries' society. So there is also there is actually an area of buildings along the streets, and there is also roads everywhere, and there's street everywhere, and there are train stations everywhere. So there are also subways everywhere. So this circumstance proved that the politics in these countries are working well, So it doesn't mean that it is impossible for them to confront a natural disaster for themselves to some extent, I think. So I think it is time to give them knowledge of the risk management of natural disaster and the process of decision making or political measure for natural disaster for themselves. So what I want to say here, just telling them how to fish instead of giving them fish. So from my eyes, helping them in the form of just only donation and only external assistance doesn't actually help them in a real sense. Support of African countries from World Food Program is undoubtedly humanitarian support, humanitarian activity, but I think WFP support doesn't bring any fundamental solutions for this problem. So using money for something that is not totally fundamental solution for the problem is not really different from throwing money down the drain. So in my opinion, the problem that African countries always rely on external aid from external organization is deeply rooted in African mentality that influences politics of African countries. So if WFP donates huge amounts of donations, huge amount of funds to these countries in the name of support, asking some ex-politicians from African countries to participate in national administration of these countries as an advisor will be way more beneficial than simple donation and simple external assistance in the sense of encouraging these countries' political independence, I think.